Front and Center. Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Welcome to Front and Center, where we focus on developments in the Philippines, legislation that provides policies and directions that strives to promote a better economy for the country, issues that concern the welfare and well-being of every Filipino. All of these and more will be Front and Center. You can watch this program on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. This program, Front and Center, can also be heard on the following shortwave frequencies: 12.010 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.820 MHz. Join us for another edition of Front and Center with your host, Jerome Toledo. The Philippines and China's foreign affairs officials met this week to discuss and explore ways to resolve the issue on the West Philippine Sea. However, China, through its state-run newspaper, said that the Philippines and China is at the crossroads of its diplomatic relations. Manila should seriously consider its relations with Beijing as both nations try to find solutions to territorial dispute in the disputed seas. How does that pronouncement from China affect the relations between the two Asian nations? Let's hear the interview of the program to an international studies expert from De La Salle University, none other than Professor Renato De Castro. And we have now here on the program is a foreign policy expert, none other than Professor Renato De Castro. Professor De Castro, thank you so much for joining us in the program. This is Jerome Toledo from Front and Center.
Hello, good morning, Jerome. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for accommodating us in the program here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service, Front and Center. Okay, the Philippines and China's relations are at a crossroads right now amid the issue on the South China Sea. And as I read, a part of a commentary published in a state-run newspaper, People's Daily, it said, quote and unquote, "At present, China-Philippines relations are at a crossroads, facing a choice of where to go. There is no way out of conflict and confrontation, and dialogue and consultations are the right way." And also, the Philippines should seriously consider the future path of China-Philippines relations, work with China in the same direction, and push bilateral relations back on track as soon as possible. And this week, DFA, or Department of Foreign Affairs Undersecretary Teresa Lazaro, has met with senior Chinese official, that's Vice Foreign Minister Chen Xiaodong, to explore ways to lower the tension in the West Philippines. So what are your thoughts on this, on that commentary and the recent meeting of Philippines and China?
Well, first of all, now we have to take into account what's the message, who's basically conveying the message in the People's Daily. The People's Daily is the official mouthpiece or newspaper of the Communist Party of China. So we're getting the message directly from the Communist Party of China. And honestly, I find it kind of, amusing that the Chinese are telling us, the Chinese Communist Party are telling us that we're at the crossroads. But actually, China has actually crossed the red line, if I may use the term. China has employed, of course, coercive actions against the Philippine Coast Guard in several instances. Our resupply mission towards Yunging Shoal, and of course, recently, the number of rammings that had been conducted by the Chinese Coast Guard against the Philippine Coast Guard around Sabina Shoal. So I simply don't know whether they're saying crossroads, but actually the Chinese had crossed the line. They have already applied coercive actions that actually is tantamount to the use of force, although not kinetic, but it's basically ramming is an ancient form of warfare. If you're familiar with the naval warfares fought by Athens and Sparta during the Peloponnesian War, the one applied by the Romans against, its enemies in the Mediterranean. So, China has basically been using, an ancient form of warfare, ramming. So, why is the Chinese telling us we're at the crossroads? They have already crossed that crossroads.
And also, China is, as I understand it, it's like they're open now in negotiating in order to lower the tensions in the West Philippine Sea, particularly negotiating with us. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, this is a classic Chinese, what I call two-prong approach. On the one hand, they basically use coercion, harassment. Then, of course, they always apply the diplomatic track. But they are connected. So by using harassment, coercive actions against us, while engaging us in a diplomatic negotiation, this is a reflection of China's bad faith when it comes to negotiation, putting us purely on a defensive. So yeah, at least we're conducting negotiation with them. But on the other hand, we see their coercive actions being conducted against the Philippine Coast Guard, against the Philippine Navy, and constant harassment of Filipino fishermen in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. So this is what we're facing right now. Chinese maritime expansion, Chinese coercive actions and harassment, and China's negotiating with us, but always on the basis of bad faith.
And yeah, like we mentioned, and like what I mentioned earlier, the Philippines and China will discuss on areas of cooperation such as hotline mechanism, Coast Guard cooperation, and marine scientific and technological cooperation. So, do you think China is serious about this negotiating with us?
Well, those measures you mentioned would only happen if the atmosphere is conducive for cooperation. But given China's efforts to basically subjugate us and always put us on the diplomatic in a position wherein China will always have the diplomatic initiative, would not provide the conducive behavior for actual cooperation. China is simply pushing us to the corner. So how can you basically negotiate with a maritime power that's basically bent on expansion, and basically its purpose is to subjugate us like a tributary kingdom in the ancient time? So how can we have cooperation when you have this environment happen? When you have this environment where this, of course, diplomatic negotiation is happening.
I see. And on the other hand, Professor De Castro, so there is a statement from People's Liberation Army, which is by the name of Lieutenant General He Lei. He said that China would crush any foreign hostile encroachment on China's territorial, sovereign, and maritime rights and interests with firm determination, staunch will, strong capability, and effective means. So, is this something that our government, including our armed forces, should be concerned of?
Yeah, we're concerned. That's basically a warning. Again, this is a reflection of China's bad faith every time we negotiate with them. At the time we're having diplomatic negotiation, you have the pointed threat of military action against us. So the government should be aware of China's effort simply bent, primarily intended for subjugation, to treat us basically like a tributary kingdom in the ancient times. So again, this is a serious concern for us. You have, of course, the country that has the largest navy in the world, the largest coast guard in the world, threatening to use force against us. And it is coming from the military. This could be kinetic or coercive. But would we allow ourselves to be cowered into the corner? That's a matter of national pride, dignity on our part.
I see. Regarding with this statement from a senior military official of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and at the same time, the Chinese government itself is negotiating with the Philippine government to discuss discuss ways to lower the tensions in the West Philippine Sea.
Of course, again, this is a point, and that's what I'm talking about. China's approach to diplomatic negotiation is always two-pronged. Number one, it's what they call the direct, word negotiating with us. Then the other one, you have the indirect, something that's happening on our flanks, on our side, which involves basically depriving us of any diplomatic room to maneuver by simply the use of, the very obvious threat of the use of force, actual harassment of our Coast Guard vessel, and of course actions conducted by the People's Liberation Army's Navy, the Coast Guard, the Maritime Militia, that are always intended to put us on the defensive. So this is something that we're facing. But of course, other countries are watching the situation. I think a couple of days ago, Secretary Lloyd Austin talked with Secretary Chodoro, and of course, the recently, in fact, the spokesperson of the Department of Defense of the United States indicated, again, reaffirmed, telling China that, of course, any action, any coercive action, use of force against Philippine public vessel, air or sea, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Coast Guard, would trigger Article 4 of the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. Plus, of course, all have Australia, Japan, the European Union indicating their diplomatic support to the Philippines. So we're faced with this very challenging situation, but fortunately, we're not alone. You have, of course, our treaty ally behind our back, Japan, Australia, indicating their support. And of course, the entire international community is watching China's action in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea.
I see. And we should always do multilateral talks in order to resolve the West Philippine Sea issue.
Oh yes, I think this was already expressed by Philippine ambassador to Washington, D.C., Ambassador Jose Babes Romualdez, that on the side of the United Nations General Assembly, there might be a summit of 20 countries that would really put China on the spot when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issue. Although I heard President Marcos will not be attending the United Nations General Assembly in September, Secretary Manalo and Ambassador Babes Romualdez will be there probably to observe how will this summit, the summit of 20 countries on the side of the United Nations General Assembly, would at least put more pressure on China in terms of its, trying to moderate or mitigate its, very coercive, simply undiplomatic behavior towards the Philippines.
And the Philippines will surely rally support from our United Nations members when that General Assembly comes.
If we show firmness and, of course, steadfast.
Professor?
Philippines.
Yeah?
Yes. We can only rally, generate support if our own people support our government, stand behind our government in standing up against Chinese maritime expansion and, of course, threats of the use of force against our armed forces and against our government.
I see. Okay. And with that, thank you so much, Professor Renato De Castro, for joining us in the program. That's a valuable insights you just gave to us in this program. And thank you. And we hope to see you again. And hear you soon.
Thank you very much. Okay. Have a great day.
And that was Professor Renato De Castro, an international studies expert. And finally, last Friday, September 13th, President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. celebrated his 67th birthday. In his wish, the consolidation of the entire Philippine agriculture sector to improve the living conditions of Filipino farmers and their families. President Marcos made the remarks when asked about his birthday wish during a media interview in Gimba Town in Nueva Ecija province. And to recall, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. manifested his strong commitment to transform the Philippine agriculture sector by leading the Department of Agriculture since assuming the presidency in 2022. The president has assured that no one will be left behind under Bagong Pilipinas or New Philippines during the launch of the program. And that concludes this edition of Front and Center on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Together with our producer Erwin Piñano and technical personnel Milo Junella. This is your host Jerome Toledo. Join us again here on Front and Center. Mabuhay and love the Philippines.
You have just heard and watched Front and Center. Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.